Colleagues, so we touched upon operators and IETF. Very interesting subject. I think that you'll be speaking in Russian, I hope, right? Okay. IETF mission. Good morning. Let's talk about the operators and this secret organization named IETF. I am Ignas Bagdonas. I'm network director and regional director of Econics, and then at night I'm involved in IETF. Alexey Melnikov. So I develop software for PL and mailing resources, and the rest of the time I'm one of the 3 application real-time director and of IETF as I'm Jeff. Currently I work at IETF, so I determine the strategy, and at night as my colleagues. So we do IETF routing. So the routing area to working groups in the routing area and a member of international board. So let's warm up a little bit. So show of hands. Who are operators? Raise your hands here. Or operator. And who of you are familiar with IETF and doing something about that? And who of you are in the both operators and you know what IETF? So do we have anyone who knows both things, right? And so are you using because you okay, now just jokes aside, what is IETF? So let's talk business right now. So that's organization that from theoretical and practical point of view is working on the standardization of practically all technologies that you work with in the internet. All of them, practically all of them. So in the last 30 years, all technical standards and specifications, all new things that coming along that at certain point of time will come out or have come out. So they go through the Internet Engineering Task Force. So they go through all of them. All of them go through this. It's a group of people with common interests, sharing common interests, informal structure they have, and so they're involved in engineering and the development of standards so that they could later implement those technologies in a more harmonious and stream way. And so the main goal is to produce high quality proper technical material, to develop it, put it together so that later the users vendors, operators, implementers could put to different uses for their own purposes. So this is so-called. So this is the backdrop, and so the history and the context of this presentation 4 years ago in the right meeting. So Chris and Grandemont and John George, they made a study. So they polled so the operators so asked what the problems are, what their wannabes would be, and which way they want this process to be, so how optimal and streamlined fashion. So they did this polling, and so if I remember, so about 60 different questions were put to those operators, and so then we streamlined them. So we produced a document, a working document in IETF that described the summary of all these questions.
Probably some of you read this document and at least is familiar with what you have inside. So these are just answers to some questions. So the most important problem, and we focused on it many times in the answers, and that the language that is being used in IETF and in other standards and the language that is being used by operators, field operations, even if we speak about the BGP itself, IETF speaks about the spherical BGP in vacuum, but as operators, you talk about specific BGP realization by specific vendors and platforms and releases. And the questions that you believe important, for instance, what team should I include to make it in this way, does not actually match the questions, the problems that IETF addresses. So what new attribute should be done to address this kind of abstract problem? Looking at the dreams, how could it look? What would be the ideal situation? IETF as an organization could develop standards that would bring specific, benefits and that are technically correct. And the operators will contribute what they need, and they tell, this is the problem, you are so smart, just address it and we'll use it. And the operators would also participate in IETF activities, or physically come to the meetings or comment on through mailing lists or somehow. And the operators know what they plan and what they can kind of forecast in the future, in the short run, and what are the new technologies and how you use them. And operators also comment about the technologies that are being launched and deployed. And but in real life, it looks a little different. Many of the participants in IETF are operators, not academicians. And it does not mean negative criticism for operators or academicians or the scholars, but the operators are a minority, and the technologies users and so the operators are the users of IETF products. And very often we see the situation when a working group in IETF has been working on something for the last 5 years, but then the vendors would take 3 years to develop a code or a platform, and finally this platform is launched. And as operators, you look at it and say, guys, what have you been thinking about when we cannot use it because of that, and that? And the typical answer where have you been? Where were you? Why didn't you tell us that you need this and that and that? When we were, we were sitting and idle and watching when we were developing it. And it's revolving, the situation is again the same again and again. And what we hear from the operators, they just don't know what's new. In IETF, what are the new technologies and how you get ready for them? A simple case, for instance, end-to-end encryption, which is very important now. How do we work on the network that's encrypted? What are the consequences for the normal operations practices and other matters? Should we look at the spherical operator, real operator? We can break them down to 3 parts. Theoretical. There are 3 groups that involved in technological programs. The architecture, the people who draw clouds on whiteboards, engineering, that work more with vendors and their platforms, and operations that support and deploy and operate the network every day. And the first thing that we see is open or, not very open conflicts between them. They don't like to share information. Just admit, if you're an architect, do you often invite the junior operations people to lunch or to discussing some interesting matters? Well, neither do I. I confess, I have a confession to make. If we look at the interworking of other organizations or entities like IETF or vendors, hardware vendors, integrators who make most of the implementations, and a community of operators, the communication fields don't overlap much. And the groups who face operation problems usually don't communicate to the groups who have access to architecture and IETF in order to give them feedback what they need and where's the bug, what doesn't work. Let me give you some specific examples from the discussions 4 years ago. Some problems would be easy to address. These are, well, some people don't know how EITF functions. It's simple, easy to explain. My colleagues will tell you. Many don't know how to participate. And the most important, you don't need to physically go someplace to participate and influence the process and give your feedback. Physical meetings take place 3 times a year in various places of the world, but as operators, you don't have to go. Even IETF is not your main activity, you don't have to. And there are some other more important problems that are not so easy to address: time and resources and financing. And true, that's a common problem. And ITF is a volunteer organization. So people who work there formally do not even have contracts with their organizations. And it's done by volunteers because they are interested. Yes, many vendors and operators there have support of the employer for that, because employers understand the benefits these people can bring. And one of the very sensitive and pains is that ITF as organization does not always accept the feedback from the operators. And for one reason is that the language that they speak, operators speak, and the ITF community. And very often it happens that people work in ITF, they are experts in their very narrow niche. They know virtually everything, but they have no wider view to other aspects that operators as a rule have. If you are an operator and come with a question that does not fall within this narrow scope of the expert knowledge, the answer maybe you don't understand what you are talking about, and maybe just don't bother us. That's it. This is a problem. And again, it can be addressed by listening, understanding, knowing people, and developing personal contacts. So let me now pass the microphone over to my colleague who will tell us about participation in IETF and how it works. So formally, the main activity is carried out by working groups on subjects, and groups also are clustered into areas. Group connecting to an area is a thing, so you don't need to understand it. It's rather done for the management and by them, because each area is managed by 2 or 3 area directors, so they need somehow to divide the work. So if you have an interesting problem or a question, if you come to IETF or you want to send a letter, you can send it to any area director, and they will just refer you to the proper people who do it, who are involved. And then participation is open to everyone, just like any organization. If you subscribe to the list and then start boasting and saying you are great and no one understands you, no one will listen to you. But if you start step by step, uh, just audit all your drafts and send your comments and get some reputation, then people will kind of get used to you and you just shape in properly. And people will respect you and your opinion. So in fact, there is nothing new. I guess just like in any organization, when you join, you have to look around and see how it works. And then you just participate in it. So most of the discussions are done by mailing lists. You don't really have to come personally, even to 3 times a year to face-to-face conferences. There's Meet-Echo that allows you to listen to the video records of all the people. And you can make a web call, make questions, and there are chats for discussions for the working groups that meet. And then, so my advice is to start by reading. Sign up, subscribe, send your comments, ask questions, and it'll be good. As I told you, in IETF we have 8 areas: routing, transport, internet, security, operations and management, applications in real time, and general area that does internal processes. We have several slides about the new things in the areas. We shall not talk about all of them, but I'll specifically tell about what I do. I'm one of the 3 area directors. In fact, in applications in real time, there are 34 working groups, and I am not in charge of all of them, but I can tell you about some. One of the groups, several working groups, improve security, email infrastructure, then encode the traffic between organizations. UTA working group does it, and then fighting spam and phishing in DMARC working group. Several working groups work on developing and refurbishing existing application for them to work on HTTP, like voice video calling or DNS over HTTP, and several working groups doing Internet of Things. In particular, recently a document was published on JavaScript for sensors and low-capacity devices in core working group. And then there is work ongoing on secure voice and video calling, how you protect secure caller ID, how you encode the traffic, and how you make encoded conference calls so that intermediaries could not decode the traffic and listen what you say, what these callers discuss. And there are several working groups doing access to email store and extra working group is now studying IMAP and extensions, and working group on other protocols that will work with the JSON over HTTP. And then evolution of HTTP, and several years ago a new HTTP2 was launched, and now HTTP over QUIC is in development. There are documents how to use poly data from TLS 1.3 from with HTTP and sockets and other things. I'll tell you what is happening in the routing area, and you're familiar with the HTTP. And in the routing area, we have 26 working groups on KIMPLS technologies over ways segment routing. New technology, very popular. IET, new protocols and new work on routing data center. As you know, ISS and NSP are quite conventional protocols developed when TPU resources were limited and topology was not densely. If you look at the current present data centers, all devices have links between them, and existing protocols don't work well on them. So we arranged two new working groups, specifically working on new routing protocols for data centers. And tomorrow I'll tell you about the rift and evolution of the routing, matching the data centers. And security. Many of you know MD5 is unsecure, so we arranged formal review team that will make recommendations how to do routing more secure. As Alexey told you, IETF is a vertical structure with working groups and area directors. IAB coordinates in between. We look at the way Internet develops, evolves, and the consequences it will have for the protocols for encryption and encoding. And there are several drafts of products, and they attempt to explain what happens. And it's not in the specific ITA area or working group, it's across. Should you look at the low latency document or architecture virtualization, they actually discuss common problems that is not limited by certain verticals in IT. Besides, we have many programs on IP stack evolution in 10 years' time. What's happening around globalization of traffic and CDNs and public cloud, presently carrying most of the traffic. So there are so many interesting things we publish in our reports. Just keep reading. IETF, we have a motto. We believe in rough consensus and running code. And 2 years ago, we started again hackathons. Usually, they happen 2 days before IETF. On the weekend, as a rule, people work on IETF problems, and they are not writing codes. They're writing codes and develop documentations, people who write and tenders, and we work together to prove that the traffic can work. And the number of people who participate in hackathons is growing, and we wanted to see you to participate, to get involved, to address problems, to work on specific things.
Operations and management area.
I'm one of the area directors
Management сторони.
uh,
І
on the management side,
котрі
and the working groups in this area are busy with two big things: historical support of protocols and architectures that have to do with management, just like a diameter IP fix and things. And it's rather maintenance, nothing especially new. And you need some extensions, some code points, and architecture of those tools is quite stable, and we don't expect anything special. One exception, we have BMP BGP maintenance protocol for that, is a tool that allows to look at what is happening in your BGP network in a very granular and detailed manner, and much simpler, much and universal between implementation than common line and proprietary management interface can allow you. Another large group is modeling, young, and everything that is related to network modeling. And today we shall have a session, a tutorial on modeling and the transport protocols and the way it works. And if you are interested, as far as remember, it's in this room. In this room. Young, yes, in this room. Good. What should we do next? Yeah, this was a short story about the IETF, the way it interacts with operators and the troubles, the hurdles. We would like to have a discussion. If you have some absolutely, pending questions, please approach the mic. If we still have no time, we shall be around all day and tomorrow. Please approach us with your questions, with your wishes, requests, with gifts, whatever you have for IETF. We shall try to oblige. How do you want to participate? Watch our mailing lists, documents that we announce. Just keep reading. Stay tuned for technical development to stay current. If you see that something in those documents is not true or just looks weird to you or incorrect, don't be shy. Tell us about it in the mailing lists. Discussion. And both, it's not just propaganda of IETF operators. What are the problems you have on the wider side? What's missing in some maybe technical protocols, architectures, and other things? We are not vendors. We certainly cannot reply why a vendor of a platform has some bugs or something works or doesn't work. So you need to discuss it with a vendor. But on general technological matters, we shall listen to you. Interpreter cannot. Fragmentation of what? Yeah. Packages of or internet. Good. Is it a IETF problem? Good. I have a comment about something you mentioned, and to follow up on our Marseille talk. So we need to involve ops because there's no. It's good, but it's showing that IETF has some kind of academic view on things, because life options are much more grounded, practical, and probably you won't be very happy with involvement when Flair started their famous 1111, one of the ops Telegram chats. I read a comment, wonderful comment, that when you idiots, we use this address, and they definitely use it. They will certainly discover it very soon and cancel. I beg your pardon. This is a very kind of conventional state of mind of operations. Then those high matters, when you start thinking about something, somehow just fire that person from operations and send him to development. So I support with both hands that you need to train operations, but in operators, So first, you should warm them up, and then just throw them into IETF. You don't need juniors. You'll be screaming with horrors if they come to you. Yes, at this structure, of the operator in the vacuum, the lines of interaction look more or less this way, like the operations directly. That's a dotted line because
This is the reality. These are the people who see the world through the console, and they fully understand how it works at the command level. And definitely, so they will certainly kick us into the corner. So whenever they know exactly which approach to use. But this is the first and the second step to understand how technologies work. And so, because you cannot just take someone from the street and give them this role of architecture. This architecture role, so then it won't work that way. So it just the people, because if we just take someone from the street, then they will just spoil it all, and it will take time. So because it's a long time. So when we grow up professionals, so first you work in the operations and the engineering integrations department, and then you go to the architecture a component, and it takes time to grow such people, even in the operations very often. So they bring the feedback, so which is extremely important. So let's take BMP as an example. So we need this BMP. We need to calculate how many was duplicated announcements. How many? So SEC system requires this kind of meter, but it's not there in the protocol. So this feedback comes from the operations, and those who are involved in architecture. And so they don't know what is there is such thing as a meter. So that's to answer your question in a civilized fashion is the same kind of paradigm. So with the doctor and patient. So why are you doing me? Why are you hurting me? Says the patient. So if you use 111 in your network, is it your problem or is the IETF problem? And if you take someone's block and you're using inside in your own system, and then you run into problems, isn't it your problem? So why are you doing that? So I fully realize that sometimes when we have to do it, and sometimes there are solutions which are justified, fully justified, but this is kind of the justified risk, so which you have to accept. Yes, I understand. I relate to that, but I'm saying that operations, unlike other groups. So the operations is looking through the chink in the armor and at the world. So like this, so small fissure, a small chink. And regarding everything as a war going on, and so they address the specific tasks and regard the rest of the world as a belligerent animal, and so then a content provider, so in Yandex, I know exactly that every engineer finds it difficult to understand what the engineer of another block is talking about, because their language is different, operations completely different tasks. And so they live within. So for them, the whole world is their area, their realm. So they don't have this big picture. They don't have this picture at bird's eye view. So so they live in their own shell. And so I'm just adding. I don't want to contradict you. I'm just trying to add to this big picture. So we should not make this picture rosy, too much rosy. I agree with that. So, but the reality is that IETF needs even this input from the operators. Because this is we need it. Even if someone comes and says, so if I just put in this this command in the console, so then you filter away some remote data. So because this command does this, and then at the protocol level something happens, and this is a good feedback that we're getting. Yeah. So therefore, for the routing area, if you look at the working group and develop routing protocols, practically each big vendor. As the developers who write routing code, they are an IETF. So because the feedback loop is very short, and so we need to know who works there. So sometimes it's much easier he who writes codes, so there's much better to explain what happens rather than just to leave this channel, especially in the routing where the developers participate in development of the protocol. Maybe it's sufficient. Then it's positive. Yes, so one more question. Arman Peshухонов, Netcracker company. Besides the slide where it's also where the person who is an operator should come and in the billing list to write something, just correct, review the documents. What other instruments you propose? So to involve the operations and network planning of the operators department in the development of standards. The most important mechanism is the mailing list. The mailing list and all discussions and solutions that are discussed at physical meetings. They need to be confirmed at the mailing list. And for this you don't have to physically be present at the meeting. And there are no other ways of cooperation. So then some private groups exist there. That's true, but this is at the discretion of each group. So you need just to look at the specific working group, the way they operate. So some use a versioning control. They use so some use versioning control of the text, and so the different approaches. But since the way the working group likes to proceed, that's how they do it. Then another area is where you can look at the interworking is inside your organization. So you can just do an analysis. So what use can you get if you participate in IETF? So what's in it for you? If you're an operator who needs certain customized solution at the level of architecture, the protocol, then you can certainly wait for a long period of time until your vendor develops it for another operator, and then you can use it too. On the other hand, so you can just try to influence this vendor and tell him, so that there are the technical details that we need, and could you do that? And if yes, then how? Then there is another point that's related to this analysis. So what use what does stand to gain if your people inside the operations and engineering organization understand wider? So what is it good or bad? So then their zone of responsibility, you see a bigger picture, and can do certain standard, not a standard, but can have a big picture view how technologies interact with each other and how it can be used, to see this big picture. Have I answered your question? Yeah, partly, yes. Okay, so we can continue this discussion during the break because it's time, so they're pushing us away from the stage. That's about the operators who come to IETF, and so they have their own customized solutions they propose, and so it works only for large operators. I've never seen this as a small draft or RFC where as participants we would have some small operators, people. So usually it's big operators that can contribute. I would not agree that it's often, but not always. It's not the rule. So there are lots of documents where we have only one leading author, so from the big operator, and then small unknown or a little. The size of the operator is not as important as the content that the document has. Okay, colleagues, so let me interfere. Allow me. I plead to. Yeah, right. And if you. Okay, just finish up. Yeah, if you want to finish up, please, because we need some final words. Okay. So two topics. So first, just look what IETF does and try to participate. So because it's good for your development, it's useful, it's broadening, and the second idea is to take a coffee break. Thank you.